Did you watch the previous parts of the story, The Ashes That Made Trees Bloom? Okay, let me remind you the summary of the story, The Ashes That Made Trees Bloom. This is the story of an honest and hardworking old couple and their pet dog. They loved the dog very much, but the dog had a sad death. Now the wicked and greedy couple lived in the same village, killed the dog. But the spirit of the dog gave solace and support to his master, and the good old couple became rich. But the greedy couple were jealous. They did the same things as the good old man did, but each time they failed in their attempt. Now, a procession was passing by the roadside and the good old man was ready with his basket of ashes on the withered cherry tree. So now you are very anxious to know what happened to the old man, aren't you? Okay, let's start the class. Take your text, turn to page number 62. The train drew near. One tall, competent man marched ahead, crying out to the people by the way, "Get down on your knees, get down on your knees," and everyone kneeled down while the procession was passing. The train drew near. Here train means procession. So the good old man was waiting for the daimyo, and as the train came near, one tall competent man, competent means having enough skill or knowledge to do something well or to the necessary standard. Competent means having enough skill or knowledge to do something well or to the necessary standard. So, one tall competent man marched ahead. He was commanding or shouting at the people to get down on their knees. Why did he say so? Because it was a custom. Okay. So, everyone kneeled down while the procession passed by. Next paragraph. Suddenly, the leader of the van caught sight of the aged man up in the tree. He was about to call out to him in an angry tone, but seeing he was such an old fellow, he pretended not to notice him and passed him by. So, when the daimyo's palanquin drew near, the old man, taking a pinch of ashes from his basket, scattered it over the tree. In a moment, it burst into blossoms. Suddenly, who saw the old man? The leader of the procession saw the old man up in the cherry tree. At first, he decided to call out to him in an angry tone, but suddenly he changed his mind. Why? Because the leader recognized that he was such an old fellow, he was such an old man. So, he pretended that he didn't notice him and passed the cherry tree. See, the leader was in front of the procession, and when the daimyo's, the landlord's palanquin, what do you mean by palanquin? Palanquin means royal van or car, it's palanquin. So, when the daimyo's palanquin came near the cherry tree, the good old man, where was the good old man? Yes, he climbed up the cherry tree. He was now in the cherry tree. The good old man sprinkled or scattered pinch of ashes over the tree. And wow, within seconds it burst into blossoms. The tree was filled with pink flowers. Okay. Next paragraph. The delighted daimyo ordered the train to be stopped and got out to see the wonder. Calling the old man to him, he thanked him and ordered presents of silk robes, sponge cake, fans and other rewards to be given him. He even invited him to his castle. So, the old man went gleefully home to share his joy with his dear old wife. The daimyo was very happy. He was so excited that he ordered to stop the procession and he came out from his palanquin, means royal car, to see the wonder. For what? To see the wonder. He called the good old man, thanked him for this beautiful sight, and he ordered his servants to bring gifts of silk robes, sponge cake, fans and many other rewards for the good old man. The daimyo also invited the good old man to his castle, to his palace. The good old man was so happy, he was very happy, and he gleefully returned home to share his joy with whom? Yes, with his dear old wife. Okay, let's continue. But when the greedy neighbor heard of it, he took some of the magic ashes and went out on the highway. There he waited until a daimyo's train came along, and instead of kneeling down like the crowd, he climbed a withered cherry tree. The greedy neighbor, the wicked neighbor, heard of this incident. He also took some of the magic ashes and went out to the highway. He was waiting for a daimyo's train, means procession. When he saw that the procession was coming close to him, he suddenly climbed up a withered cherry tree. Instead of kneeling down like other people, he climbed up into a withered cherry tree. Okay. Next paragraph. When the daimyo himself was almost directly under him, he threw a handful of ashes over the tree, which did not change a particle. The wind blew the fine dust in the noses and eyes of the daimyo and his wife. Such sneezing and choking, it spoiled all the pomp and dignity of the procession. The man whose business it was to cry, "Get down on your knees," seized the old fool by the collar, dragged him from the tree, and tumbled him and his ash basket into the ditch by the road. Then, beating him soundly, he left him for dead. Thus, the wicked old man died in the mud, but the kind friend of the dog dwelt in peace and plenty, and both he and his wife lived to a green old age. When the daimyo, the landlord, was almost directly under him, he threw a handful of ashes over the cherry tree. And what happened, you know? Did the tree bloom? No, nothing changed. The ashes didn't change even a little bit. The withered tree looked the same as that of before. Instead of sprouting blossoms, the wind blew the fine dust, the ashes, into the noses and eyes of the daimyo and his wife, and they began to sneeze. It spoiled all the pomp. Pomp means the impressive clothes, music, decorations and traditional customs that are part of a ceremony. So pomp means the impressive clothes, music, decorations and traditional customs that are part of a ceremony. So it disarranges the order and dignity of the procession. You know, there was a tall, competent man whose duty was to shout or to command, "Get down all the people on the wayside on their knees." Seized means caught the wicked fool by his collar and tumbled him. Tumbled means to fall downwards, often hitting the ground several times. Okay. So he dragged him from the cherry tree and tumbled him and his ash basket into the ditch. What do you mean by ditch? Ditch means a long channel dug at the side of a field or road to hold or take away water. So ditch means a long channel dug at the side of a field or road to hold or take away water. So the competent man tumbled him and his ash basket into the ditch by the roadside. Then he began to beat him soundly and left him for dead. So that was the punishment given to him by the landlord. The wicked old man died in the mud, but the kind friend of the dog, the good old couple, dwelt in peace. What do you mean by dwelt? Dwelt is the B2 form of the word dwell. Dwell means to live somewhere. Dwell, dwelt, dwelt. We can also say D-W-E-L-L-E-D. So D-W-E-L-T and D-W-E-L-L-E-D. Both are correct. So the good old couple dwelt in peace and they lived to a green old age. What do you mean by green? Green here means they live a healthy, active and prosperous old age. Okay, so they live to a green old age. Japanese tale, William Elliot Griffiths. Okay, William Elliot Griffiths wrote this Japanese tale. So you like the story? Yes. Now let's watch a video.
A Japanese tale. In the good old days of the daimyos, there lived an old couple whose only pet was a little dog. Having no children, they loved it as though it were a baby. The old dame made it a cushion of blue crepe, and at mealtime, Muko, for that was its name, would sit on it as snug as any cat. The kind people fed the pet with tidbits of fish from their own chopsticks, and all the boiled rice it wanted. Thus treated, the dumb creature loved its protectors like a being with a soul. The old man, being a rice farmer, went daily with hoe or spade into the fields, working hard from morning until O Tento-sama, as the sun is called, had gone down behind the hills. Every day, the dog followed him to work, never once harming the white heron that walked in the footsteps of the old man to pick up the worms. For the old fellow was patient and kind to everything that had life, and often turned up a sword on purpose to give food to the birds. One day, the dog came running to him, putting his paws against his legs and motioning with his head to some spot behind. The old man at first thought his pet was only playing and did not mind it. But the dog kept on whining and running to and fro for some minutes. Then the old man followed the dog a few yards to a place where the animal began a lively scratching. Thinking it was possibly a buried bone or a bit of fish, the old man struck his hoe in the earth, when lo! A pile of gold gleamed before him. Thus in an hour, the old couple were made rich. The good souls bought a piece of land, made a feast for their friends, and gave plentifully to their poor neighbors. As for the dog, they petted him till they nearly smothered him with kindness. Now in the same village, there lived a wicked old man and his wife, not a bit sensitive and kind, who had always kicked and scolded all dogs whenever any passed their house. Hearing of their neighbor's good luck, they coaxed the dog into their garden and set before him bits of fish and other dainties, hoping he would find treasure for them. But the dog, being afraid of the cruel pair, would neither eat nor move. Then they dragged him out of doors, taking a spade and hoe with them. No sooner had the dog got near a pine tree growing in the garden than he began to paw and scratch the ground as if a mighty treasure lay beneath. "Quick, wife, hand me the spade and hoe!" cried the greedy old fool as he danced with joy. Then the covetous old fellow with a spade, and the old crone with a hoe began to dig. But there was nothing but a dead kitten, the smell of which made them drop their tools and shut their noses. Furious at the dog, the old man kicked and beat him to death, and the old woman finished the work by nearly chopping off his head with the sharp hoe. Then they flung him into the hole and heaped the earth over his carcass. The owner of the dog heard of the death of his pet, and mourning for him as if he had been his own child, went at night under the pine tree. He set up some bamboo tubes in the ground, such as are used before tombs, in which he put fresh flowers. Then he laid a cup of water and a tray of food on the grave, and burned several costly sticks of incense. He mourned a great while over his pet, calling him many dear names as if he were alive. That night, the spirit of the dog appeared to him in a dream and said, "Cut down the pine tree over my grave and make from it a mortar for your rice pastry and a mill for your bean sauce." So the old man chopped down the tree and cut out of the middle of the trunk a section about 2 feet long. With great labor, partly by fire, partly by the chisel, he scraped out a hollow place as big as a small bowl. He then made a long-handled hammer of wood, such as is used for pounding rice. When New Year's time drew near, he wished to make some rice pastry. When the rice was all boiled, Granny put it into the mortar. The old man lifted his hammer to pound the mass into dough, and the blows fell heavy and fast till the pastry was all ready for baking. Suddenly, the whole mass turned into a heap of gold coins. When the old woman took the hand mill and filling it with beans began to grind, the gold dropped like rain. Meanwhile, the envious neighbor peeped in at the window when the boiled beans were being ground. "Goody me!" cried the old hag, as she saw each dripping of sauce turning into yellow gold, until in a few minutes the tub under the mill was full of a shining mass of gold. So the old couple were rich again. The next day, the stingy and wicked neighbor came and borrowed the mortar and magic mill. They filled one with boiled rice and the other with beans. Then the old man began to pound and the woman to grind. But at the first blow and turn, the pastry and sauce turned into a foul mass of worms. Still more angry at this, they chopped the mill into pieces to use as firewood. Not long after that, the good old man dreamed again, and the spirit of the dog spoke to him, telling him how the wicked people had burned the mill made from the pine tree. "Take the ashes of the mill, sprinkle them on the withered trees, and they will bloom again," said the dog spirit. The old man awoke and went at once to his wicked neighbor's house, where he found the miserable old pair sitting at the edge of their square fireplace in the middle of the floor, smoking and spinning. From time to time, they warmed their hands and feet with the blaze from some of the bits of the mill, while behind them lay a pile of the broken pieces. The good old man humbly asked for the ashes, though the covetous couple turned up their noses at him and scolded him as if he were a thief. They let him fill his basket with the ashes. On coming home, the old man took his wife into the garden. It being winter, their favorite cherry tree was bare. He sprinkled a pinch of ashes on it, and lo! It sprouted blossoms until it became a cloud of pink blooms which perfumed the air. The news of this filled the village, and everyone ran out to see the wonder. The covetous couple also heard the story, and gathering up the remaining ashes of the mill, kept them to make withered trees blossom. The kind old man, hearing that his lord, the daimyo, was to pass along the high road near the village, set out to see him, taking his basket of ashes. As the train approached, he climbed up into an old withered cherry tree that stood by the wayside.
So, when the daimyo's palanquin drew near, the old man, taking a pinch of ashes from his basket, scattered it over the tree. In a moment, it burst into blossom. The delighted daimyo ordered the train to be stopped and got out to see the wonder. Calling the old man to him, he thanked him and ordered presents of silk robes, sponge cake, fans, and other rewards to be given him. He even invited him to his castle. So the old man went gleefully home to share his joy with his dear old wife. But when the greedy neighbor heard of it, he took some of the magic ashes and went out on the highway. There he waited until a daimyo's train came along, and instead of kneeling down like the crowd, he climbed a withered cherry tree. When the daimyo himself was almost directly under him, he threw a handful of ashes over the tree, which did not change a particle. The wind blew the fine dust in the noses and eyes of the daimyo and his wife. Such sneezing and choking, it spoiled all the pomp and dignity of the procession. The man whose business it was to cry,
"Get down on your knees!" seized the old fool by the collar, dragged him from the tree, and tumbled him and his ash basket into the ditch by the road. Then, beating him soundly, he left him for dead.
My dear students, did you enjoy the video? Yes. Okay. If you wish to watch the previous parts, the links are given in the description box. Hope all of you have understood. That's all for today. See you in the next class. Bye.